It is often said that history is written by the victors, a commonly occurring theme in military history and history in general. This is no clearer seen than during the Second World War. Amidst the righteous fury of World War II and the highly publicised brutalities of the Axis powers lies a dark truth seldom spoken about. The Allies, draped in the guise of virtue, committed atrocities that often rivaled those of their enemies. Under the immense heat of battle, the line between heroism and horror blurred, as the Allies unleashed a torrent of destruction upon their foes. From the firebombing of Dresden to the annihilation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Allies wielded their weapons of war with ruthless abandon, leaving behind a trail of devastation and despair. Whilst there is no comparison to some of the heinous and inhuman acts committed by the Axis forces, such as the likes of the Holocaust and the Nanjing Massacre, there is no denying that the often portrayed morally superior Allies also played a role in dehumanising innocent civilians in the theatre of war. And as seen throughout history, such events are swept under the rug to maintain the façade of morality so keenly desired to be upheld. In the aftermath of victory, the spectre of vengeance loomed large, as Allied forces exacted brutal retribution upon their defeated adversaries. From the execution of German and Polish civilians to the internment of Japanese Americans, the Allies turned a blind eye to the very principles they claimed to uphold. Biscari Massacre. During the Allied invasion of Sicily, the US forces were tasked with capturing coastal towns, as well as the Comiso Airport and Biscari Airfield. During this operation, the 180th Infantry Regiment, part of the 45th Infantry Division, performed poorly, and the Assistant Division Commander was sent to exercise close supervision over the regiment. It was during the capture of the Biscari Airfield, however, that things went from bad to worse. In the chaotic aftermath of the battle, a group of American soldiers committed atrocities against Italian civilians and prisoners of war. Reports indicated that the soldiers rounded up a large group of Italian prisoners of war and civilians, including women and children, in fields near Biscari. They then opened fire on the defenceless captives, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries. The massacre is believed to have been carried out in retaliation for the killing of American soldiers earlier in the day, as well as due to the breakdown of discipline and the stress of combat. The exact number of casualties remains uncertain, with estimates ranging from 50 to 70 dead. The Biscari Massacre shocked military commanders and led to repercussions for the US soldiers involved. Investigations were launched, and several soldiers were court-martialed for their role in the massacre. Some were convicted and received prison sentences, whilst others were acquitted or had their charges dismissed due to lack of evidence. When he was informed of the massacres, General Omar Bradley told General George Patton on the morning of the 15th of July 1943 that US troops had murdered some 50 to 70 prisoners in cold blood. Patton noted his response in his diary. "I told Bradley that it was probably an exaggeration, but in any case to tell the officer to certify that the dead men were snipers or had attempted to escape or something, as it would make a stink in the press and would also make the civilians mad. Anyhow, they are dead, so nothing can be done about it." Bradley refused Patton's suggestions. Patton later changed his mind, after he learned that the 45th Division's Inspector General found no provocation on the part of the prisoners. They had been slaughtered. Patton is reported to have said, "Try the bastards." In the end, Sergeant Horace T. West was found guilty of premeditated murder, stripped of his rank, and sentenced to life imprisonment. Eventually his sentence was remitted, and he was restored to active duty and continued to serve during the war, at the end of which he received an honourable discharge. West died in Oklahoma in January 1974. Captain John T. Compton was also court-martialed and charged with the premeditated murder of 36 POWs under his charge. He was acquitted, however, but the judge advocate's review of the trial declared that in his opinion, Compton's actions had been unlawful. Compton was transferred to the 179th Infantry Regiment and subsequently was killed in action in Italy. Firebombing Civilians. Towards the end of the war, as the Nazis were being driven back and their defeat was looking imminent, the Royal Air Force, alongside the US Air Force, looked to drive home the advantage. A strategic bombing campaign was conducted against German cities, which included the controversial tactic of firebombing. One of the most infamous episodes of this campaign occurred during the bombing of Dresden in February 1945. The bombing raids on German cities involved dropping large quantities of high explosive and incendiary bombs, with the goal of causing widespread destruction and disrupting German industry and morale. Incendiary bombs, in particular, ignited fires that engulfed entire urban and civilian areas, leading to catastrophic damage and loss of life. The civilian death toll from the firebombing raids was staggering. In Dresden alone, it is estimated that between 25,000 and 40,000 people were killed, although precise figures remain disputed. Similar raids on other German cities, such as Hamburg, Cologne and Berlin, resulted in tens of thousands more casualties. The firebombing campaign provoked significant controversy and debate, both during the war and in its aftermath. Critics argued that the attacks constituted indiscriminate targeting of civilian populations and amounted to acts of terror. The morality and effectiveness of the bombing strategy was fiercely debated, with some questioning whether the devastation inflicted on German cities justified the human cost. One argument, however, was that the Blitz, a similar campaign, had been carried out by German forces against British cities, and so justified the retaliation of British forces in this manner. In the years following the war, the RAF faced scrutiny and criticism for its role in the bombing campaign. Allegations of war crimes and violations of international law were levelled against British military leaders and aircrew involved in the raids. However, no formal charges were ever brought, and the British government maintained that the bombing campaign was a necessary response to the threat posed by Nazi Germany. Moroccan Goumiers. Goumiers were colonial irregular troops, forming the Goumiers Moroccan, which were approximately company-sized units, rather loosely grouped in battalions and regiments. Regular Moroccan troops also served in Italy, but under tighter discipline, and with a higher proportion of officers than the irregular Goumiers. This meant that there was much less control over the troops, and a much higher potential for ill discipline. After the Battle of Monte Cassino during World War II, Moroccan Goumiers committed horrific acts of mass rape and killings in the surrounding Italian countryside. Following the capture of the strategic Monte Cassino Abbey in May 1944, the Goumiers, known for their ferocity in battle, unleashed a campaign of violence against Italian civilians. General Alphonse Juin was alleged to have said before the battle, "For 50 hours you will be the absolute masters of what you will find beyond the enemy. Nobody will punish you for what you will do. Nobody will ask you about what you will get up to." While there is no evidence of any such statement by General Juin, in 2007 Barras Tommaso justified it by claiming it was linked to the perception of the crimes by the Italians, rather than an official policy of the French army. The exact death toll from the atrocities committed by the Moroccan Goumiers remains uncertain, but estimates from Italian victims' associations alleged that 3 million women, ranging in ages from 3 to 40, suffered from violence, when village under village came under control of the Goumiers. Estimates made by the Italian Ministry of Defence in 1997 set the figure at 200,000 to 300,000 female victims. The number of men killed has been estimated at 80,000. The violence and brutality inflicted upon the local population left a deep scar on the region and its inhabitants. The repercussions for the Moroccan soldiers involved in the atrocities were limited. While some were disciplined by their commanding officers, the overall response from military authorities was relatively lenient. The Goumiers were considered valuable and effective combat troops, and their actions were often overlooked or downplayed in the interest of maintaining morale and military cohesion. Following the atrocities, however, 200 soldiers were tried for sexual violence, of which 168 were convicted. 3 of those convicted were executed. Another 28 soldiers who were caught in the act were summarily executed. In January of 1947, France authorised the compensation of 1,488 victims of sexual violence for crimes committed by French colonial troops. However, the extent of the atrocities and the culpability of those responsible remain subject of historical debate and controversy. Katyn Massacre. On the 1st of September 1939, the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany began. This was followed by the Soviet invasion of Poland on the 17th of September, in accordance with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Red Army advanced quickly and met little resistance, as Polish forces facing them were under orders not to engage the Soviets. About 250,000 to 450,000 Polish soldiers and policemen were captured and interned by the Soviet authorities. Most were freed or escaped quickly, but 125,000 were imprisoned in camps run by the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB. Of these, 42,400 soldiers, mostly of Ukrainian and Belarusian ethnicity, serving in the Polish army, who lived in the territories of Poland annexed by the Soviet Union, were released in October. Not all were so lucky, however. Once at the camps from October 1939 to February 1940, the Poles were subjected to lengthy interrogations and constant political pressure by NKVD officers. The prisoners assumed they would be released soon, but the interviews were in effect a selection process to determine who would live and who would die. According to NKVD reports, if a prisoner could not be induced to adopt a pro-Soviet attitude, he was declared a hardened and uncompromising enemy of Soviet authority. In the end, 22,000 Polish military officers, intellectuals, and other prominent figures were executed. In early 1940, they were transported to Katyn Forest near Smolensk in Russia and systematically shot in the back of the head. The massacre was part of Joseph Stalin's campaign to eliminate perceived threats to Soviet control over Eastern Europe and decapitate the Polish leadership. The death toll from the Katyn Massacre is estimated at around 22,000 Polish prisoners, making it one of the largest mass killings of the war. The victims were buried in mass graves in Katyn Forest, where their bodies remained hidden for years until they were discovered by the German army in 1943. The repercussions faced by the Soviet soldiers responsible for the Katyn Massacre were largely political and diplomatic. Initially, the Soviet Union denied any involvement in the killings and blamed the massacre on the Germans. However, evidence uncovered by the Germans, including exhumations of the mass graves and forensic examinations, conclusively linked the crime to the Soviets. The revelation of Soviet responsibility for the Katyn Massacre strained relations between the Allies, particularly the Soviet Union and the Western powers. The massacre became a symbol of Soviet brutality and betrayal, undermining the wartime alliance between the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain. Despite mounting evidence of Soviet culpability, the Allies ultimately chose to prioritize their strategic partnership with the Soviet Union in the fight against Nazi Germany, and the truth about the Katyn Massacre remained suppressed for decades in the interests of maintaining wartime unity. In the shadows of history lie the untold tales of war's darkest deeds. To forget is to forsake the memories of those who suffered, to silence the voices of the fallen. From the blood-soaked battlefields to the hushed chambers of power, the echoes of war crimes reverberate through time, demanding justice and remembrance. For every atrocity buried in the annals of victory, a legacy of anguish remains, a reminder that the price of freedom is etched in the scars of the innocent. To remember is to honour their sacrifice, to ensure that history's lessons are never lost to the passage of time. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a like. And for more amazing tales and thrilling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Secrets. Also, hit the bell icon to stay notified for every release.